Today, we're looking at something really special. George Washington's own letters, his direct, unfiltered correspondence with the Continental Congress, we're focusing on those crucial first years, 1775 to 1776.
Yeah, and this isn't about the marble statue version of Washington. This is the boots on the ground general, frankly, drowning in logistical nightmares, political battles, and just sheer existential worry. Our mission here is to use Washington's own words. You get these desperate pleas for supplies, his strategic thinking out loud, his blunt demands to really grasp the incredible chaos he was navigating.
Right. We're watching him transform, aren't we? From a guy trying to lead disparate militia groups.
Into a commander demanding professional standing army. And that was a huge ask, politically and philosophically, for the revolution he was supposedly leading. It went against the grain.
So we're diving right into the thick of it. These letters, they cover quite a span. We start with the Siege of Boston, late 75, then move through all the political knots and diplomatic issues of early 76.
Yeah, the messy stuff.
And finally, we hit the crisis point, the absolute disaster after the Battle of Long Island in September 76. It's like a roadmap showing just how close this whole military effort came to completely falling apart in its first year and a half.
Exactly. You can sort of see three key phases in these letters. First, late 75, it's all about just building an army, trying to create something coherent out of militias whose enlistments were like constantly running out.
A revolving door.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Then the second phase, early to mid-76, he's managing these high-level problems, getting supplies from overseas, dealing with internal command squabbles, and critically keeping the military subordinate to Congress.
Maintaining that balance.
Right. And then the third phase, late 76. Well, that's just confronting disaster in New York. And it's where he really forces Congress to face the reality. You need professionals to fight this war. These letters really expose that gap between the revolutionary ideal of the citizen soldier and the cold, hard facts of military necessity.
Okay, let's start there at the beginning. Late 1775, Washington's outside Boston, Cambridge specifically. He takes command, but it's a mess organizationally, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A nightmare.
Yeah.
One of the first things he hammers Congress about is the need for specialized skills, particularly artillery. The Americans were, frankly, amateurs when it came to big guns.
They just didn't have the know-how.
Or the hardware, really. I mean, the British in Boston, they've got powerful cannons. Washington's got, well, not much, and nobody who really knows how to use them effectively. This is why his focus on Henry Knox is so important.
Knox wasn't a military man originally.
Not at all. He was a bookseller from Boston. Brilliant guy, self-taught in military matters, but definitely not your typical officer with a long pedigree. Washington just didn't have time for the old hierarchy. He needed results. He needed competence, like yesterday.
And he needed the actual cannons, those heavy guns, to make the siege viable. Guns that were hundreds of miles away at Fort Ticonderoga. He writes about this on November 28th, 1775, setting Knox on this incredible task.
Yeah, the famous noble train of artillery. Let's hear what he wrote.
Okay, he says, I had the honor of writing to you the 19th instant. I have now to inform you that Henry Knox, Esquire, is gone to New York with orders to forward to this place what cannon and ordnance can be there procured.
See, he's already put Knox in motion.
And then he adds, from thence he will proceed to General Schuyler on the same business, as you will see by the enclosed copy of instructions which I have given him.
Just think about what that actually involved. This wasn't just, picking up an order. Knox had to figure out how to move dozens of massive cannons and mortars, we're talking multi-ton pieces across 300 miles of wilderness.
In winter.
In the dead of winter. No real roads, no specialized gear. He's dealing with sleds, oxen teams, frozen rivers, mountains. It's incredible. That one mission, it just sums up the whole challenge of 1775. Inventing solutions on the fly.
Yeah.
Because there's no national system for anything.
It really does sound like a miracle they pulled it off. But Washington knew getting the guns wasn't enough. He needed a proper structure, a permanent commander for this new artillery corps, and he needed Congress to make it official, fast.
Exactly. He's juggling the siege itself while also trying to build the foundations of a professional military.
Yeah.
And everything depends on getting approval from politicians hundreds of miles away in Philadelphia.
Which leads to him directly asking Congress to appoint Knox, or someone like him. He's basically lobbying them.
He is. He needs their formal blessing to override the usual way of doing things.
Here's a quote. It would give me much satisfaction that this gentleman, or any other whom you may think qualified, was appointed to the command of the artillery regiment.
He's being polite, but the message is clear. Look, I found the guy we need. He might not fit the mold, but he's essential. You, Congress, need to make this happen now. He even says in the same letter something like, the formation of that corps will be at a stand until I am honored with your instructions thereon.
So the whole artillery setup is stalled, waiting for Congress.
Yeah. The structure, who's in charge, even basic organization, it all hinges on this slow political body. That's the constant friction he's dealing with.
But even getting the artillery sorted was, in some ways, secondary to the bigger crisis he was facing: morale, and specifically enlistment. The whole romantic idea of the citizen soldier just wasn't holding up.
No, and this is where Washington's letters get really raw, really emotional. He sounds genuinely shocked, almost.
Yeah.
Betrayed, I think, by how few men were willing to re-enlist for the continuance of the war.
Because the tradition was just short-term service.
Right. 6 months, maybe less. That was the colonial way. So as those initial terms ended in late 75, guys were just packing up and going home, and often taking their muskets with them because they saw them as personal property.
Which brings us to that quote where he just lays bare his disappointment. It's quite striking.
It really is. The idealism has just crashed into reality.
He writes, "I am very sorry to be necessitated to mention to you the egregious want of public spirit which reigns here. Instead of pressing to be engaged in the cause of their country, which I vainly flattered myself would be the case, I find we are likely to be deserted at a most critical time."
Egregious want of public spirit. I mean, that's a harsh judgment from the commander-in-chief. He'd bought into the ideal, maybe, that patriotism alone would fuel the fight. Instead, he's finding, well, self-interest, guys wanting to get back to their farms. The consequences were potentially devastating.
How bad was it on the ground? What does this constant turnover actually mean for an army?
It means you basically don't have a stable army. It's constantly dissolving and reforming. You can't build cohesion. You can't maintain discipline effectively.
Oh.
Washington mentions having to grant furloughs, like 50 men per regiment at a time, just to manage the chaos of expiring terms.
So you train someone up.
Exactly. You spend weeks, maybe months, getting a soldier trained, teaching them drills, getting them integrated into their unit, and then poof, his 6 months are up and he's gone. Then you get a raw recruit and start all over. It's an insane waste of time and energy, and it guarantees you're always weak.
And he wasn't shy about pointing fingers either. He mentioned specific troops he'd expected more from.
No, he really calls them out. He says that the troops upon whom I reckoned are as backward, indeed, if possible, more so than the people of this colony. Our situation is truly alarming.
Truly alarming. And he knew the British knew, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He was acutely aware that General Howe, sitting in Boston, was getting intelligence about this. People leaving Boston would talk. Deserters would talk. Washington mentions reports that the state of the American camp was the common topic of conversation among British officers. He's basically trying to hold a siege line with a hollowed-out force, just praying the British don't attack.
Yet, even with all this internal chaos, he still had to project some strength, make some moves. He mentions taking Cobble Hill in late November.
Right, a strategically important piece of ground. It was almost like a necessary bluff, a show of initiative, despite the weakness.
And he notes something interesting about it. He says taking the hill was effected without the least opposition from the enemy.
Which sounds good, but you can immediately sense Washington's suspicion. Why didn't the British oppose it? His next thought is revealing, he writes. Their inactivity on this occasion is what I cannot account for. It is probable they are meditating a blow somewhere.
So even a small success makes him more anxious.
Exactly, because he knows how weak he really is. Enemy in action doesn't feel like luck. It feels like they're planning something bigger. He's constantly on edge.
He was also trying to look outwards, sending spies to Nova Scotia for intelligence. But even then, he admits his army's condition makes any kind of offensive move impossible.
Yeah, he states clearly that any offensive action's off the table because of the present unsettled and precarious state of the army. Survival and stabilization were the only goals. And amidst all that, he still has to enforce military law. We see this with the case of Colonel Enos.
Right, the officer who was arrested for basically abandoning his post during Benedict Arnold's march to Quebec.
Yeah, Enos turned back with his men during that incredibly difficult trek. It's a small detail in the letters, but it shows Washington setting a standard. Even though he desperately needed experienced officers, he couldn't let desertion or dereliction of duty slide.
Well, he couldn't court-martial him right away.
No, because he needed Arnold's account, and Arnold was, deep in the wilderness heading for Quebec. It highlights the communication delays he was dealing with. But arresting Enos sent a message. Duty matters. Orders matter. He's trying to build discipline from the ground up, even while the army is falling apart around him.
Okay, so let's shift forward into 1776. The siege of Boston eventually ends. The focus moves to New York. Washington's job description seems to expand dramatically now. It's not just recruits and logistics. It's high-level politics, even foreign affairs.
Absolutely. The scope changes entirely. A really key example early on is how he handles potential foreign aid, specifically the arrival of these French gentlemen, Messieurs Penet and de Pliorn.
Who are offering weapons?
Arms and ammunition, yes.
Yeah.
A huge potential boost for the Continental Army coming from France, which was obviously looking for ways to stick it to the British. Washington immediately saw the value. He called their plan very eligible. Basically, yeah, this looks good.
But he didn't jump on it himself.
No, and this is crucial. He flat out refused to make any deals, commit any money, sign any contracts. He recognized this was way above his pay grade as a general.
So what did he do?
He persuaded them paying their expenses out of public funds to go straight to Philadelphia and talk to Congress. Here's how he put it.
Okay, quoting again. I have declined entering into any engagements with them, but have prevailed with them to proceed at the public expense to Philadelphia, and there, through you, to lay their proposals before Congress.
That single decision is foundational for American civil-military relations. Think about it. If the top general starts negotiating directly with foreign powers, controlling foreign money, well, that starts to look a lot like a military figure taking over political functions.
Like a potential military dictator, almost.
Exactly. The fear. Washington was adamant that the military remains subordinate to the elected civilian government. Congress had to own the political decision and the financial responsibility for foreign aid. He wouldn't cross that line.
That same sense of propriety of the military's place comes up again in that famous incident with General Howe's letter in July 1776, right after the British fleet arrives in New York.
Ah, yes, the Esquire incident. It sounds like a small thing, but it was pure diplomatic theater with huge implications. The Howe brothers, admiral and general, send a letter under a flag of truce trying to open communication, but it's addressed
to George Washington Esquire, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, addressing him as a private gentleman, pointedly not as a general.
And Washington had given orders?
He had. His aide, Colonel Reed, refused to accept the letter precisely because of the improper address. The British officer had to take it back.
Why was that so important? It seems like quibbling over titles when facing a massive invasion force.
Because accepting that letter would have meant implicitly agreeing with the British view, that he was just George Washington Esquire, a private citizen leading a rebellion, not the commanding general of a legitimate army representing sovereign states.
It would undermine the whole Continental Army's legitimacy.
Completely. By insisting on the proper military title, General Washington, he was forcing the British, and by extension the world, to acknowledge the Continental Army as a real army and the United Colonies as a real political entity they were at war with, not just some internal rabble.
It was a power move, disguised as protocol.
A calculated one, definitely. It mattered for prisoner exchanges, for potential foreign recognition, especially from France. It showed Washington was thinking strategically, not just tactically. And it worked, eventually. Howe grumbled, but later sent a letter addressed properly because he needed to communicate. It was a small but significant diplomatic win.
So he's juggling foreign agents and enemy commanders, but he also had fires to put out within his own command structure, rank disputes, jealousy.
Oh yeah, the Continental Army was definitely not immune to professional rivalries.
Yeah.
The conflict between General Horatio Gates and General John Sullivan in the Northern Department is a prime example.
What was the root of that?
It really gets at the tension between different types of officers. Sullivan was a classic line officer, commanded troops directly in the field, focused on fighting. Gates, on the other hand, was more of a staff officer, an adjutant general, brilliant at organization, paperwork, logistics, kind of like a chief of staff.
And Congress promoted Gates over Sullivan for the Northern Command.
Well, Gates was sent up to assist Sullivan, but there was ambiguity about who was ultimately in charge, and Gates's supporters in Congress pushed for him. Sullivan, the field commander, felt deeply insulted that a staff officer, someone perceived as being behind a desk, was potentially ranked above him. He threatened to resign.
Which would have been a big loss.
Huge. Sullivan was experienced, aggressive, maybe too aggressive sometimes, but definitely a fighter. Losing him, especially with the constant threat from Canada, would have been terrible for the Northern Army's stability and morale. So Washington, again, has to step in and play mediator.
He writes to Congress about trying to smooth things over.
Yeah, he's clearly worried about losing Sullivan. You can hear his pragmatic approach.
He says, I was apprehensive the appointment of General Gates over General Sullivan would give the latter disgust. He's not arrived yet, When he does, I shall try to settle the affair and prevail on him to continue, as I think his resignation will take from the service a useful and good officer.
See that? It's all about utility.
Yeah.
A useful and good officer. He's not really trying to fix the underlying political issue of how Congress handles promotions between line and staff. He's just trying to keep a valuable asset in the fight.
So it's damage control.
Pure damage control. He needs both Gates's organizational skills and Sullivan's fighting ability. He can't afford to lose either over bruised egos fueled by decisions made far away in Philadelphia. Luckily, Sullivan did go to Congress, got some clarification, and calmed down. But it just shows another layer of political complexity Washington had to manage daily.
Okay, this brings us to the summer and fall of 1776 and the real crisis point, New York. After the Declaration of Independence, the British arrive in force and things go south very quickly, culminating in the Battle of Long Island.
Yeah, August 27th, 1776. A disaster for the Americans. Washington's initial reports to Congress right after the battle are, well, they're grim, very direct, very factual, but you can feel the shock.
What does he focus on?
The immediate losses, obviously. He reports the engagement, notes his troops were badly outnumbered, unequal to the force they had to contend with. But critically, he reports the capture of two key generals. Sullivan, yes, the same Sullivan, and Lord Stirling.
Losing two generals in one battle.
It's a massive blow.
Yeah.
Not just morale, though that was terrible. It rips holes in the command structure.
Yeah.
It creates confusion, instability, right when they need leadership most.
But even in the immediate aftermath, Washington's thinking tactically, trying to anticipate the British next move.
That's what's remarkable. Amidst the chaos, his strategic brain is still working. He assesses that the British, having won the battle, probably won't try an immediate, risky frontal assault on the American lines on Brooklyn Heights. Instead, he predicts they'll switch to regular approaches.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning a slow, methodical siege. Digging trenches, moving artillery closer, step by step, gradually encircling the position. Standard 18th century siegecraft. Recognizing this was crucial because it implied he had a little bit of time, not much, but some, before the final squeeze.
But there was another threat looming, wasn't there? The Royal Navy.
Always the elephant in the room in New York. The British sea power was overwhelming. Washington reports seeing 5 enemy warships trying to get up the East River, potentially cutting off his retreat route from Brooklyn. He also passes on intelligence from a deserter about a planned severe cannonade to destroy American shore batteries.
So Manhattan itself was incredibly vulnerable.
Fundamentally indefensible in the long run, yes. If those ships got past the batteries, they could sail up the Hudson and the East River, isolate Manhattan, cut supply lines, bombard the city at will. The strategic situation was deteriorating rapidly on land and sea.
This really sets the stage for what you called maybe the most important letter of the war, his dispatch from September 2nd, 1776. This is where he stops just reporting and starts demanding fundamental change.
Exactly. This letter is a turning point. It's where Washington lays it all on the line. He even starts by acknowledging how tough it is to deliver bad news, which signals just how bad the news is going to be.
How does he begin?
He writes, "Our situation is truly distressing. The checker detachment sustained on the 27th. Alto has dispirited too great a proportion of our troops and filled their minds with apprehension and despair."
So it's not just a military defeat, it's a psychological collapse.
Precisely. The battle didn't just cost men, it broke the Army's spirit. And this collapse, he argues, is directly tied to the militia problem.
The citizen soldiers Congress loved so much, how did they react to the defeat?
According to Washington, terribly, he gives these really stark, brutal details about how the militia were behaving. This is the core of his argument against relying on them.
Let's hear that quote. It sounds pretty damning.
It is, he says. The militia are dismayed, intractable, and impatient to return. Great numbers of them have gone off, in some instances almost by whole regiments, by half ones, and by companies at a time.
Whole regiments just dissolving.
Yeah, just packing up and leaving. He says their want of discipline and refusal of almost every kind of restraint in government was infectious. It was spreading panic and disorder to the regular Continental troops. The very foundation of the Army, the militia ideal, was actively undermining the entire military effort in the face of real danger.
So this disaster becomes his proof, his evidence for needing something different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the context, the undeniable proof he needed to make his most radical demand. America needs a professional, permanent, standing army.
A standing army. Those words alone must have set off alarm bells in Congress.
Oh, massively. In the 18th century, standing army was practically synonymous with tyranny. People thought of Cromwell in England, of armies used by kings to suppress liberties and force taxes. The whole revolution was, in part, against the idea of a powerful permanent military controlled by the state. It was deeply ingrained in their political DNA.
Yet Washington just comes right out and demands it.
He does. He knows the political risk, but the military reality is too dire. He uses language that conveys absolute certainty. This is the famous quote, "I am persuaded and as fully convinced as I am of any one fact that has happened, that our liberties must of necessity be greatly hazarded, if not entirely lost, if their defense is left to any but a permanent standing army, I mean, one to exist during the war."
To exist during the war, not just for a season, but for the long haul. And he didn't just make the military case, did he? He backed it up with economics.
Yes, that was strategically brilliant. He immediately pivots to argue that the current militia system, with its constant short terms, was actually more expensive. Why? Because Congress had to keep offering cash bounties, signing bonuses every few months to get men to enlist or re-enlist.
Bleeding the treasury dry for temporary soldiers?
Exactly. It was unsustainable and ineffective. Washington argued that a one-time, more substantial incentive for long-term service would be cheaper and create a stable force.
And his proposed incentive wasn't cash, was it?
No, it was land. He proposed offering land grants, 100 acres for privates, more for officers, to anyone who enlisted for the duration of the war. This was genius because it tapped into that deep American desire for land ownership, for independence. It offered a stake in the future republic.
So it's an investment, not just a payment.
Precisely. It shifted the motivation from quick cash to long-term commitment. And faced with the disaster in New York and Washington's forceful arguments, Congress actually listened. They soon passed resolutions offering land grants for long-term enlistment. Washington used military failure to force a crucial political and structural change.
Okay, so while he's fighting for a professional army for the future, he has this immediate burning question. What to do about New York City right now? Defending it seems impossible, but just abandoning it.
It's a huge dilemma. The city has immense value, shelter, supplies, strategic location, but holding it ties down troops in an exposed position. Washington knows the British will want it for winter quarters, so he asks Congress, point blank, the hardest question.
Should we burn it down?
Essentially, yes. He phrases it carefully, of course. He asks, if we should be obliged to abandon the town, ought it to stand as winter quarters for the enemy? They would derive great conveniences from it on the one hand, and much property would be destroyed on the other.
He's framing it as a trade-off. Military advantage versus property destruction. And he needs Congress to make the call.
Because destroying a major American city, that's a political decision of the highest order. Far too big for a general to make alone, especially one so careful about civilian authority.
So this leads to a council of war with his generals. What did they decide?
They met around September 7th, and the consensus was pretty clear. Militarily, holding New York City was hopeless. Washington reported that it was acknowledged by every man of judgment to be untenable, mostly because of the British Navy.
So why didn't they just evacuate immediately?
Politics, largely. Washington notes that the majority of his generals were influenced in their opinion by what they knew or suspected Congress wanted, which was not to just give up the city without a fight. They felt political pressure to hold on, to save property, to maintain appearances.
So they compromised.
They did. They decided on this awkward three-part deployment, leave about 5,000 men in the city itself, basically a delaying force, put the main body of 9,000 up at Kingsbridge to secure the escape route off Manhattan Island, and scatter the rest in between. It was a plan driven partly by military necessity, securing the retreat, and partly by political considerations, not abandoning the city entirely just yet.
Washington knew this strategy, essentially a phased retreat, would draw criticism, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Retreating is never popular. It looks like failure. It damages morale. He addressed this directly in his letters to Congress, defending the need to protract the war.
Let's hear how he justified it. It sounds like he's managing expectations.
He is, he writes. I am sensible a retreating army is encircled with difficulties, that the declining in engagement subjects a general to reproach, and that the common cause may be in some measure affected by the discouragements which it throws over the minds of many.
He acknowledges the downsides.
Right, he continues. But when the fate of America may be at stake on the issue, when the wisdom of cooler moments and experienced men have decided that we should protract the war if possible, I cannot think it safe or wise to adopt a different system when the season for action draws so near a close.
He's basically saying, look, I know this looks bad, but survival is more important than a glorious defeat. Our best strategy is to stay alive, keep the army intact, and wear the British down over time.
It's a radical idea for the time, really. 18th century generals were often expected to seek decisive battle. Washington is embracing a strategy of attrition, of strategic patience, even if it means taking political heat. His job, as he saw it then, was just to keep the revolution alive, not necessarily to win flashy victories.
And then, shortly after the Americans did pull back further north to Harlem Heights, the fate of much of the city was decided anyway by the Great Fire of New York.
Yes, on September 21st, 22nd. Washington reports this to Congress very factually, very neutrally.
No speculation about who started it. The British blamed the Americans.
They did, claiming it was arson, finding matches and combustibles. But Washington, in his official report, sticks strictly to the observed facts.
What did he say?
Just the basics. On Friday night, about 11 or 12 o'clock, a fire broke out in the city of New York, near the New or St. Paul's Church, as it is said, which continued to burn pretty rapidly till after sunrise the next morning. He notes the location, the timing, the duration. He mentions it consumed a large area between Broadway and the river.
So about a quarter of the city destroyed.
Roughly. A huge loss of property. For the British, it denied them a lot of valuable housing and facilities they'd counted on for winter quarters. For Washington, well, he didn't order it, but it certainly didn't hurt his strategy of denying the enemy resources and comfort. It was a grim end to a disastrous campaign.
Looking back over this whole period, from late 75 through 76 through these letters, what's the big takeaway? For me, it's the sheer speed at which Washington had to evolve, not just as a military commander, but as a political operator.
I think that's exactly right. He starts off trying to inspire citizen soldiers with appeals to patriotism, and within a year, he's confronting Congress with the harsh, unpopular truth.
Yeah.
You need a professional, disciplined, long-term army, even if it feels politically uncomfortable.
And the letters show him constantly juggling so many different things at once.
Yeah, it's incredible. He's dealing with logistics cannons, supplies, he's managing foreign contacts, he's smoothing over internal political fights between his own generals, he's processing battlefield intelligence, and he's constantly trying to make sense of it all, making decisions based on the grim realities he's seeing, desertion rates, costs, the power of the British fleet, not on revolutionary slogans or wishful thinking.
That September 2nd letter really feels like the culmination, using the Long Island defeat as leverage to fundamentally change American military policy.
It was. His relentless push for that permanent standing army backed by land grants was arguably one of his most vital strategic contributions of the entire war. It laid the groundwork for the army that could eventually survive and, with French help, win.
These letters really document him navigating that dangerous space between what the army needed to survive and win, and what Congress, with its deep suspicion of centralized power and standing armies, was politically willing to give.
Absolutely. He was constantly managing that gap.
So here's something to think about as we wrap up. When you read these letters from 1776, you have to wonder, how much was the progress of the American Revolution held back, not just by British military strength, but by the American leadership's own internal political fears? Their deep-seated reluctance to create the very instrument a professional standing army needed to fight the war effectively.
That's a powerful question. Was the biggest obstacle in 1776 the Redcoats? Or was it the political ideology that made building a truly effective Continental Army so difficult until disaster forced their hand? How much time, how many lives were lost in that gap between revolutionary ideals and military necessity? Something to definitely ponder.